Go ahead and get comfortable. Pull the blanket up a little. Settle in. Because what you are about to hear is not a quick summary. It is not a listicle. It is not a 5-minute recap of things you half remember from message boards. This is a full, slow, careful walk through the strangest town in the history of American television. A town where the fish have 3 eyes and nobody asks why. A town where a man has been alive for over a century and nobody finds it unusual. A town where children do not age, catastrophes are forgotten by morning, and the same family sits on the same couch in the same house every single week, cycling through the same loop that began on December 17th, 1989, and has shown no signs of stopping. That town is Springfield, and tonight we are going to take it apart. Not loudly, not urgently. Now we are going to do this slowly, in the way you might pick apart a very old, very complicated knot in the dark, fingers finding each thread, following it back to where it connects to the next one, until the whole shape of the thing becomes visible. And by the time we are done, you will either be asleep, which is completely fine, the mysteries will still be here when you wake up, or you will be staring at the ceiling with a very specific, very quiet feeling that something you accepted as a cartoon for your entire life was actually telling you something much darker all along. Let us begin with the thing that should bother you more than it does: the Springfield nuclear power plant. It has been part of the Springfield skyline since the very first episode. 2 enormous cooling towers. Their silhouettes visible from almost every location in town, releasing whatever they release into the air above a community of ordinary families who live their lives underneath them without apparent concern. The plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It is owned and operated by one man, Charles Montgomery Burns. It provides electricity to every home, every business, every streetlight and television set, and refrigerator in Springfield. The town depends on it entirely, and the town has been depending on it for decades, which would be unremarkable if the plant were run responsibly. But it is not. A surprise safety inspection conducted at the facility uncovered 342 separate violations. 342, not 3, not 12. Not the kind of number that suggests oversight was simply a little lax. 342 violations, which is a number that suggests something closer to a philosophy of deliberate neglect. The estimated cost of bringing the plant into compliance with basic safety standards was $56 million. Burns refused to pay it. Not because he lacked the money. Burns is a billionaire many times over. The kind of man whose personal fortune makes $56 million look like something you might find in a couch. He refused to spend it because spending it would have required admitting that the problems existed. And admitting the problems existed would have required answering the question that follows naturally and inevitably from that admission. What have these problems already done to the people living nearby? That question has never been asked out loud in Springfield. Not once in 36 seasons. Not by a mayor, not by a school board, not by a reporter, not by a parent looking at their child and wondering why the child's skin is yellow. The question exists. It floats in the air above Springfield the same way whatever comes out of those cooling towers floats in the air above Springfield. But nobody reaches up and grabs it. Let us look at the violations themselves, because they are not minor. They are not the bureaucratic equivalent of a parking ticket. Radioactive waste is being dumped directly into local bodies of water. The same bodies of water that flow through the town, that children play near, that the water supply draws from. Radioactive material has been found on children's playgrounds. Plutonium. The kind of substance that requires secure containment and federal oversight has been used as a desk paperweight by at least one employee. The cooling towers, the enormous structures whose entire purpose is to prevent the reactor from overheating, have been patched with chewing gum. Not metaphorically. Someone found a crack in the infrastructure of a nuclear reactor and addressed it with a wad of chewing gum, and this was considered an adequate solution. There are rats in the facility that glow, and then there is the detail that the show drops once and never returns to. In the basement of the Springfield nuclear power plant, safety inspectors found human skeletons. Not one. Not a dusty artifact from a century ago. Human skeletons in the basement of an operational nuclear reactor. The show shows you the bones, the inspector sees them. The scene moves on. Nobody asks who these people were. Nobody asks how they got there. Nobody asks what it means that the plant Burns has been operating for decades, has human remains in its lower levels that nobody can account for. Springfield does not ask. Springfield never asks. Now consider the man whose job it is to ensure none of this causes a catastrophe. The man standing between the town and whatever a compromised reactor with 342 violations could potentially do. His name is Homer Simpson. He is the safety inspector at the Springfield nuclear power plant. He has held this position for the entirety of the show's run. And the show's creator has stated on record that Homer has an IQ of 55. Not low, not below average. Clinically, demonstrably impaired. And a man who in a later episode is found to have had a crayon lodged in his brain since childhood, physically pressing against the neural tissue responsible for cognitive function, reducing the effective capability of his mind the way a stone in a gear reduces the effectiveness of a machine. Homer sleeps at his workstation. He eats during meltdown warnings. He once, in a moment that was played for a laugh, but should have been played as a tragedy, threw a donut into the active reactor core to see whether it would grow. He threw food into a nuclear reactor. Out of curiosity, that is the man guarding Springfield's radiation levels. And here's where the theory that explains everything begins to take shape. The very first visible mutation in Springfield appears in Season 2, Blinky the fish. Blinky is a three-eyed fish pulled from the river near the power plant. And for a brief moment, the show treats this as the bombshell it actually is. A gubernatorial candidate uses Blinky as evidence that Burns is poisoning the local environment. There is national attention. Burns is forced to eat the fish on live television to demonstrate it is safe. The town watches. Burns chews, the cameras cut away, and Springfield moves on. No follow-up study, no water testing, no second look at whether a fish developing an additional eye organ near a leaking nuclear facility might indicate something worth investigating more thoroughly. The question that hangs in the air after Blinky, if the radiation is giving the fish three eyes, what is the same radiation doing to the people drinking the water? Never gets asked. The answer is everywhere you look, if you are willing to look at it. Homer Simpson has a skull shape that does not occur in normal human anatomy. He has 4 fingers on each hand. His eyes bulge in a way that suggests pressure behind them. His overbite is pronounced beyond any natural variation. His body absorbs damage that would kill a person 10 times over. He has been shot, electrocuted, thrown from cliffs, struck by vehicles, caught in explosions, and every single time, by the next scene, he is upright and functional. His recovery rate is not the recovery rate of a healthy human being. It is something else. Something that suggests his cellular structure has been altered at a fundamental level. Marge Simpson has the same bulging eyes, the same 4 fingers. Her hair defies the laws of physics, yet growing straight upward in a shape she has maintained for 36 years without apparent effort. She worked at the plant herself for a period. She was inside the facility, exposed to the same violations, the same leaking infrastructure, the same contaminated air. And her children, all 3 of them, were conceived and born after both parents had been living in Springfield, breathing Springfield's air, drinking Springfield's water for years. Bart, Lisa, Maggie, all born in Springfield, all raised within sight of those cooling towers, all displaying physical characteristics that do not appear in populations that are not living next to a nuclear plant with 342 violations and a safety inspector who throws donuts into the reactor. Now, here's the detail that makes this theory click into place like something you cannot unhear. When outside visitors arrive in Springfield, they look different. Celebrities, characters from other cities, anyone who comes in from the world beyond Springfield's borders. Their proportions are more natural. Their eyes sit in their heads at a more realistic angle. Their anatomy more closely resembles how a human being actually looks. The show draws its outsiders with a fundamentally different set of proportions than it draws its residents. The explanation that is always offered is that this is just the art style. That is just how The Simpsons looks. The residents are stars, the guests are more realistic because it creates a visual contrast that signals they are from somewhere else. But within the internal logic of the show, if you accept that Springfield is a real place where real things happen, the explanation is something else entirely. The people who live inside the contamination zone look one way. The people who come from outside it look another way. The distinction is not stylistic, it is biological. Springfield's residents have been changed by something. And the thing that is different about Springfield, the thing that is not present in the cities the guest characters come from, is visible on the horizon from almost every angle. The cooling towers, the plant, the 342 violations, the 40 years of leaking radioactive material into the water supply. Burns knows. The show is very clear about this across multiple episodes. Burns funds private medical research. He retains personal physicians. And he undergoes weekly treatments so intensive that they cause his body to emit a visible green glow. Treatments that, as the show depicts explicitly, are the only thing keeping him alive. Burns has been managing radiation's effects on biological tissue in his own body for as long as he has owned the plant. He understands what radiation does to living organisms because radiation is the mechanism by which he himself continues to function. He knows what his plant is doing to Springfield. And Homer's presence in the safety inspector role is not an accident. When German investors briefly purchased the facility and took over operations, the very first thing they did was fire Homer Simpson. The second thing they did was request a compliance assessment. The estimate for bringing the plant into code nearly bankrupted them. Burns bought the plant back and immediately reinstated Homer. A competent safety inspector would have shut that facility down within a week. Homer's incompetence is not a liability for Burns. It is an operational requirement. The violations continue because Homer's continued employment ensures they continue. The crayon in Homer's brain is not just a physical abnormality. It becomes a symbol when you consider what the show reveals later. When the crayon is removed, Homer's IQ skyrockets. He becomes articulate and perceptive. He can suddenly see his life, his job, his town with clarity. And what he sees is unbearable. He sees Springfield for what it is. He sees his employment for what it is. He sees the architecture of the life that has been built around him. And the comprehension is so painful that he chooses to have the crayon replaced. He chooses the fog. But here's the question the show never asks. How does a crayon get lodged in a child's brain without anyone noticing? How does Homer pass through childhood, adolescence, adulthood, visiting Springfield's doctors, getting checkups, existing in a world where medical professionals are supposed to find things like foreign objects in skulls, and not a single one of them identifies the crayon? Either Springfield's medical establishment is so profoundly incompetent that basic diagnostics are beyond its capability, or someone in Springfield knew about the crayon and decided to leave it where it was. And if the medical infrastructure of the town is compromised, if the doctors are looking away from the damage being done by decades of radiation exposure, now if Burns' influence extends into the healthcare system of the town he essentially owns, then Homer's crayon is not an accident. It is a symptom. It is the show telling you in the gentlest possible way that the people of Springfield have something wrong with their brains. Something that keeps them quiet and compliant and incapable of looking up at those cooling towers and asking the single question a thinking person would ask immediately. Why are we all like this? The radiation theory does not explain one mystery in Springfield. It explains all of them. The characters do not age because their mutated biology has been altered at the cellular level in ways that conventional aging does not seem to affect. The town resets after catastrophic events because the population's memory function has been compromised by decades of neurological damage. But Homer survives impossible injuries because his body has adapted to radiation in ways that make him extraordinarily durable while leaving his cognitive function devastated. Burns stays alive through treatments that would destroy a normal person because he has been managing his own radiation exposure for a century with resources nobody else in the town has access to. And nobody questions any of it because the same slow contamination that changed their bodies also changed the part of their minds responsible for asking questions. Springfield is not a quirky town full of eccentric characters. Springfield is a contamination zone, and everyone inside it is a symptom of the same cause. The nuclear plant is not the background of the show. It is the engine of it. Every yellow face, every impossible recovery, every forgotten catastrophe, while every three-eyed fish and four-fingered hand and child who has been 10 years old for 4 decades, all of it traces back to the same cracked cooling towers, leaking the same invisible material into the same water, feeding the same altered brains that cannot figure out why everything around them is the way it is. The plant built Springfield, and Springfield will never know it. If you are still awake at this point, and hello, good evening, welcome, drop a comment with your time and your location. It is genuinely one of the best parts of making these videos, seeing where people are watching from at 2 in the morning. And if you want more of this, the subscribe button is right there. It costs nothing and it means a great deal. Now, let us keep going. Section 2. Homer's Coma Theory. The Dream That Never Ended. Now that you have settled into the radiation theory, now that Springfield has begun to look a little less like a cartoon town, and a little more like something you might find in a document stamped with a federal hazard classification, we are going to introduce the second theory. And this one reframes everything. Because what if all of it, the radiation, the mutations, the impossibilities, the reset button that wipes the slate clean between episodes? What if all of it is taking place inside the mind of a man who has been unconscious since 1993? Let us go back to April 1st, 1993. The 18th episode of the 4th season of The Simpsons aired that night. Its title was a careful, comedic understatement. So it's come to this, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was simple. Bart, now in the spirit of April Fool's Day, plays a series of escalating pranks on Homer. The pranks grow larger, more elaborate, more dangerous, until Bart takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and places it inside an industrial paint shaker. He shakes it to maximum pressure. He puts it back. He waits. Homer finds the can. Homer opens the can. The explosion sends him to the hospital. This part of the episode is presented as a broad physical comedy beat, the kind the show had built its reputation on. Homer in the hospital, battered, bandaged, a victim of his own son's enthusiasm for mischief. The audience laughs, the family gathers. And then Homer, lying in his hospital bed, notices a vending machine on the other side of the room. He wants a candy bar. He reaches for it, he tips it. The machine falls. It crushes him. And Homer Simpson enters a coma. Not a comedic near-death, not a dream sequence framed as one. A clinically described, medically depicted coma. He flatlines. He is unconscious. He is unreachable. The episode spends time with the family gathered at his bedside, the weight of the situation real in a way the show did not often allow itself to be. And then Homer wakes up. Bart, overcome with guilt, tearfully confesses that he is responsible for everything. Homer springs awake. He immediately begins strangling his son. The family laughs. The episode ends. Everything goes back to normal. The show tells you Homer woke up. The show is very explicit about this. Homer is awake, the coma is over. Life continues. But in the final moments of that same episode, before the credits roll, a detail is dropped so casually that most viewers absorb it and move on without stopping. Homer is told that during the coma, he lost 5% of his brain function. 5%. Gone. Permanently, not recoverable. His brain is measurably smaller in its capacity than it was before the vending machine fell. And Homer's response to this information is to laugh and then to note that he does not understand why he is laughing. The family finds this charming. Nobody finds it alarming. The credits roll. The show tells you Homer woke up. The coma theory says he did not. This is the single most popular, most debated, most internally consistent fan theory in the history of The Simpsons. It was originally proposed by a user on Reddit, and it is deceptively simple. Homer did not regain consciousness in April 1993, and every episode that has aired since that date, every storyline, every guest appearance, every impossible event, every escalating absurdity is a dream. It is being generated by the mind of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, slowly losing neural function, while his family sits beside him and waits. The evidence for this theory is worth taking slowly, because it is genuinely unsettling in its coherence. First, the tonal shift. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons operated in a register that was satirical but recognizable. Homer tries to quit drinking. Marge quietly considers whether she is happy. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher and has her heart gently broken. Bart struggles with the real possibility of being held back a year at school. These are not cartoon premises, they are human ones. Financial anxiety, marital tension, a child's fear of failure. The show was a family sitcom that happened to be animated, and its emotional power came from the fact that it was talking about things that families actually experienced. After the coma, everything changes. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures a mythological creature. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante organization. Homer joins a secret society with cloaks and rituals. Homer discovers his mother has been a fugitive radical for 27 years. Homer meets God. Twice. He meets presidents and celebrities and travels to dozens of countries and holds hundreds of different jobs. He survives physical trauma that would destroy a platoon of trained soldiers. The show shifts from a grounded family comedy into something that operates on an entirely different level of reality, one where the rules that govern normal human experience do not seem to apply. Fans have debated this shift for 20 years. The internet has been trying to identify the precise moment The Simpsons went from brilliant to something else for as long as the internet has existed. The coma theory argues that the shift is not a quality decline. It is not lazy writing. It is not the natural entropy of a long-running series. The shift happens because Homer's brain gets worse. His capacity for generating a coherent simulation of reality degrades over time, and the dream becomes less anchored, more surreal, more governed by wish fulfillment and fear and the strange logic of unconscious thought than by the observable rules of the world he left behind in 1993. Second, the prophecy. 6 months before the coma episode, in the season 4 premiere titled Homer the Heretic, Homer has a conversation with God. Not an implied conversation, not a prayer that goes unanswered, but a face-to-face exchange with a being that the show depicts as genuinely divine. And during this conversation, God tells Homer something. He tells Homer that he will one day understand the meaning of life, but not yet. His time is coming, God says. Not yet, but soon. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The timeline matches with a precision that is difficult to dismiss as coincidence once you have noticed it. God told Homer that his time was coming. His conscious, waking life ended 6 months after that conversation. Under any other framework, the divine dialogue in Homer the Heretic is a theological gag, a quick bit about Homer's complicated relationship with church-going. Under the coma theory, it is a prophecy. God was telling Homer that his waking life was nearly over, and that everything which followed would be the interior experience of a mind trying to hold on. Third, the aging problem. Nobody in Springfield ages. This is the defining feature of the show's continuity, the characteristic that every theory about Springfield eventually has to address, because it is the most visible and the most impossible thing about it. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge have not gained a single visible year. There are theories that address this through biology, through radiation, through the show's artistic conventions, but the coma theory has the most economical explanation, and it is devastating in its simplicity. But nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of a man who went unconscious in April 1993 and never came back. Homer's brain cannot imagine his children growing older because he was not there to watch it happen. He went under before Bart's 11th birthday, before Lisa turned 9, before Maggie took her first steps. His unconscious mind has access to his children as they were on the day he lost consciousness, and that is what it generates. Not because the dream cannot imagine change, but because the reference material is fixed. Homer's memory is the source code of the dream, and memory cannot add what was never experienced. The world inside the coma is the world as it existed the last time Homer saw it. Frozen. Preserved. His wife exactly as she looked on the morning the vending machine fell. His children exactly as small as they were when he was carried out of the hospital on a gurney. His house on Evergreen Terrace exactly as it looked from the street. His world stopped at the last second he was conscious to observe it, running on repeat forever inside the closed theater of his mind. Fourth, the celebrities. Later seasons of The Simpsons are saturated with celebrity guest appearances in a way the earlier seasons were not. Dozens of famous people, hundreds of recognizable voices flooding into Springfield as characters who interact with the family, who speak to Homer, who enter the orbit of the dream with increasing frequency. The coma theory explains this not as a rating strategy or a creative decision, but as a symptom. Homer's brain, lying in that hospital bed, is receiving ambient stimuli from the world outside. Nice sounds from the television in the corner of his room. Conversations between nurses and family members at his bedside. Radio programs playing in the hallway. His unconscious mind hears names, voices, fragments of cultural noise, and incorporates them into the ongoing simulation. A familiar voice becomes a character. A name heard on the news becomes a Springfield resident. Every celebrity who appears in Springfield is, in this reading, a fragment of sound that leaked through Homer's unconscious and got woven into the dream, without Homer having any control over the process. Fifth, the show's own acknowledgement. In the 34th season, in an episode called Lisa the Boy Scout, a fake deleted scene was circulated, deliberately by the production, in which Homer wakes up from a long coma and realizes that every bizarre episode, every impossible event, was a dream. The clip was presented as a hack, as something planted in the episode by outside actors. The show's response was to say it was fake, to attribute it to hackers, to deny any connection to the official canon. But they made it. The writers of The Simpsons sat down, scripted a scene in which the coma theory is depicted as canon, produced that scene with full animation and voice acting, and released it into the world. And their denial of it was wrapped inside the very content they were denying. They showed you Homer waking up from the coma. They animated it. And then they said it was a joke. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory directly in 2015. He said it is not true. He dismissed it. But the dismissal was notable for what it did not address. It did not explain why nobody ages. It did not explain the tonal shift. It did not explain the divine prophecy 6 months before the coma. It did not explain why the show becomes progressively more surreal and disconnected from grounded human experience with each passing season, which is precisely what you would expect from a dream being generated by a mind that is slowly losing its structural integrity. He said it is not true and moved on. The fans did not move on because the theory does something that no official explanation has accomplished. It makes the show make sense. All of it. The aging freeze, the tonal rupture, the celebrity flood, the reset button, the show's deepening disconnection from realistic cause and effect. That Homer's miraculous survival of everything because his body is in a bed in Springfield General, and nothing the dream does can touch it. The coma does not just explain the individual mysteries, it provides the architecture that the mysteries fit into. And then there's the emotional dimension, which is where the theory stops being clever and starts being something else. If the coma theory is true, then the question of what Homer's unconscious mind is dreaming about, the question of why it generates what it generates, has one answer. He wants his family. That is all. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be the difficult, mischievous, complicated little boy who exhausted him and made him proud in equal measure. He wants Lisa to still be playing her saxophone somewhere in the house where he can hear it. He wants Maggie to still be small enough to hold in one arm. He wants Friday night on Evergreen Terrace to last forever. And in the coma, it does. The dream gives him exactly what he wants. His family preserved, unchanged, endlessly repeating the rhythms of a life he has lost. His children never growing up, his wife never leaving, his neighborhood always looking the same. The couch always there, the television always on, a cold beer in the refrigerator, and somewhere nearby, his family. Homer's coma is not a nightmare. It is the only version of heaven a man like Homer Simpson would ever think to ask for. A house on Evergreen Terrace where the kids are small and the evenings are warm and nobody ever has to say goodbye, and every time an episode ends, every time the credits roll and the world resets and the family appears on the couch again, it is not lazy storytelling. It is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, if the simulation finally loses its coherence and collapses, Then there are only two possibilities. Homer wakes up, or Homer does not. And waking up means opening his eyes in a hospital room, turning his head, and confronting the question he cannot answer from inside the dream. How much time has passed? How old are his children now? Is Marge still there? Is anyone still sitting beside him? Or something worse? He does not wake up at all. The coma theory does not ruin The Simpsons. It makes every episode an act of love. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? The case that was never closed. Before we move forward, I want to make sure you are still comfortable. Adjust if you need to. The next section is a slower one. A mystery story, really, told in pieces. The summer of 1995. The Simpsons was at the height of its cultural power, and the show's creative team decided to do something that had never been attempted by an animated series. A genuine mystery. A real whodunit, constructed with the craft and the misdirection of classic detective fiction, designed to run across 2 episodes with an entire summer of speculation separating the question from the answer. Who shot Mr. Burns? The setup took an entire episode to build, and it was careful work. By the end of the season 6 finale, Burns had gone further than he had ever gone before. He had stolen an oil deposit from beneath Springfield Elementary School, collapsing the school's budget. He had financially destroyed Moe's Tavern, that he had caused the structural failure that brought down the Springfield retirement castle. He had injured Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, in a scheme gone wrong. And for his finale, he erected a device to block the sun over the entire town. Not metaphorically. A mechanical disc positioned to cast Springfield into permanent shade, forcing every resident to purchase electricity from his plant because natural light was no longer available. Every character in Springfield had a motive. The show built this deliberately. It walked through the evidence. Homer, whose name Burns had never once remembered in years of employment, who had finally reached a breaking point over being invisible to the man who signed his checks. Bart and Lisa, whose school had been gutted. Grandpa Simpson, whose retirement home had been destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, who lost his job. Musician Tito Puente, whose music program was cut. Moe, whose bar was bankrupt. Smithers, who had objected to the sun-blocking scheme and been fired for his trouble. The entire town gathered at a public meeting. Burns arrived. Multiple characters were shown holding weapons. The tension was genuine. Then Burns collapsed. A single gunshot wound to the chest. He staggered to the town sundial and fell, his hands landing on 2 letters. W and S. Or, from Burns's perspective, looking up from below, M and S. The screen went black. The summer began, and America had 3 months to argue about who did it. When the answer came in September 1995, it arrived wrapped in procedural comedy. Chief Wiggum led the investigation with his characteristic blend of confidence and incompetence. Yet Smithers confessed immediately, but the confession fell apart because he had been blackout drunk during the shooting and had actually shot a different person in a different location. One by one, suspects produced alibis. The investigation stalled. Then a key piece of evidence emerged. An eyelash found on Burns's jacket. DNA analysis pointed to a Simpson. Homer's fingerprints were on the gun. Homer had the clearest established motive. Homer was arrested. Homer was about to be convicted. And then Burns woke up. He looked around the hospital room, gathered himself, and identified his shooter. Maggie Simpson. His account was specific. After the town meeting, he encountered Maggie in the parking lot. He attempted to take her lollipop. In the struggle, his gun fell from his holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. Hey, case closed. Baby did it. Everyone went home. Except, let us begin with the contest, because the contest is where the official story starts to show its seams. Fox had invited viewers to submit their guesses for the shooter as part of a national promotion. The winner would be animated into a future episode. Thousands of entries were received. According to the DVD commentary for the episodes, when the producers reviewed a random sample of submissions, they found that not a single person from the sampled entries had guessed the correct answer. Not one. The show's writers acknowledged on that same commentary track that they were aware of one person who had posted the correct answer to an online news group on the night the first episode aired. One person, out of all the viewers who engaged with the mystery, but reached the right conclusion from the available evidence. And by the time the producers tried to find this person to award the prize, their account was inactive. They issued an open invitation on the DVD release for this person to come forward. As far as anyone knows, they never did. Think about what that means. The writers designed a mystery. They told the public it was solvable. They promoted a national guessing game around it. And when the answer was revealed, essentially nobody in the viewing audience had arrived there through the clues provided. Either the clues were insufficient, or the red herrings were too effective, or the answer did not follow logically from the evidence in the way the show had implied it would. Now, the evidence itself. Burns falls on the sundial. His hands point to W and S, which read as M and S from his perspective. The show offers this as pointing to Maggie Simpson, but Burns himself states on camera in the episode that this was not intentional. He did not position himself to spell out his attacker's initials. He fell. The sundial clue, the central piece of physical evidence that the show uses to support its resolution, is explicitly and on the record described by the victim as a coincidence. The most important clue and the most important mystery in the show's history is acknowledged by the person it supposedly came from as meaningless. Then there is the gun. Burns carried a firearm in a holster. Observant viewers noticed that before the shooting, the holster was shown empty. The gun was already missing before the attack occurred. This means that whoever shot Burns used his own weapon. And this detail actually matters for narrowing down the suspect pool because it means the shooter did not come to the town meeting armed. Most of the main suspects were carrying weapons that night. They brought them because they were angry enough at Burns to consider violence. The person who shot Burns was someone who was not armed, who did not plan to shoot anyone, who came across the gun by chance and used it in a moment of unplanned impulse. A baby picking up a dropped gun fits that profile. So does approximately a dozen other people who were not carrying weapons that evening. Then there are Burns's last words before the shooting. The show depicts him saying, with recognition in his voice, not fear, not surprise, simply acknowledgement. "Oh, it's you." He recognized his attacker. Does Mr. Burns recognize Maggie Simpson? Now, the show does not establish a prior relationship between them. Burns barely recognizes Homer after years of direct employment. The idea that Burns would see an infant in a parking lot and respond with the calm, almost familiar recognition of, "It's you." Not alarmed, not confused, just recognizing someone he had some prior experience with, does not track with how Burns typically processes information about the people around him. There is more. In a much later season, season 18, Homer makes a casual, on-camera statement that he was actually the one who shot Burns. He says it out loud. He says it directly. And the show's response is to have nobody react, nobody investigate, nobody reopen the case. Homer confesses to the attempted murder of the wealthiest man in Springfield, and the show treats it as a throwaway line with no consequences. Either Homer is lying for attention, which is absolutely consistent with his character and cannot be ruled out, or he is telling the truth. And if he is telling the truth, then the official verdict was wrong. A man was exonerated because a baby was blamed for his crime. The Marge theory, developed by a thoughtful fan analyst, is worth dwelling on for a moment. The case for Marge is surprisingly strong. She is a devoted and deeply protective mother who watched Burns systematically destroy her children's school, injure her family's dog, and remove the sun from the sky above her family's home. She had every reason to want Burns stopped. She is not a violent person by nature, but she is a person who, when pushed to her absolute limit in defense of her family, has demonstrated that she is capable of things that surprise even herself. The additional detail that the Marge theory rests on is an episode from an earlier season in which Burns develops a fixation on Marge. He pursues her. He is, within the show's logic, infatuated with her. And the theory proposes that Burns, waking from his coma and recognizing the woman who shot him, made a choice. He protected her. He had been shot by someone he cared about in some distorted, obsessive way, and rather than name her, he pointed at the sundial and let the narrative fall where it would. Maggie became the answer because Maggie was convenient. Chief Wiggum says it himself, almost admiringly. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maggie was the cleanest possible resolution to a problem. An infant too young to deny the accusation. She too young to understand what she was being accused of. Too young to be punished under any law. If someone with knowledge of Springfield's legal and political infrastructure wanted to protect the real shooter, pinning the crime on a baby was the most elegant solution available. The final shot of the episode lingers in the mind. Everyone has left the room. Maggie is alone. She looks around carefully, deliberately checking that she is not observed. And then she moves her pacifier in a motion that precisely mimics pulling a trigger. The show presents this as confirmation. Maggie remembers. Maggie knows what she did, but there is another way to read it. Maggie, as we will discuss at length later, is a profoundly observant child. She watches everything, she processes everything she sees with an intelligence that her age should not permit. If Maggie witnessed the shooting, if she was in the parking lot and saw what happened, even if she was not the one who fired the gun, then she is not reenacting her own crime. She is reenacting what she saw. She is doing what young children do when they witness something vivid and significant. They replay it. They mimic it. They turn the memory over and over in the way that their minds process new information. Maggie in that final shot is not necessarily confessing. She may be remembering. The alternate endings complete the picture. A fully produced, fully voiced, fully animated alternate conclusion was created in which Smithers is revealed as the shooter. Not a rough cut, not an outline, a finished product. When this ending was later shown in a clip show, now the host by Troy McClure dismisses it by noting that the DNA evidence would have had to be ignored, which would be downright nutty. The phrasing is deliberate. It is a direct reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, which had occurred in the same cultural moment as the Burns shooting, in which a jury set aside DNA evidence to reach an acquittal. The show is winking at you. It is telling you that DNA evidence gets ignored. That verdicts are shaped by factors other than physical proof. That the person who gets blamed for a crime is not always the person who committed it. That the official answer to a question is not necessarily the right answer. An early draft of the script had Barney Gumble as the shooter. The writers considered this seriously. They planned to send him to prison. They abandoned it when they could not make it work dramatically. But the fact remains that the answer was not predetermined by the clues. The clues were adjusted to fit whatever answer the writers eventually chose. The mystery was built backward. The evidence was laid in after the conclusion was selected. And in a town where every single resident had a motive, where dozens of people were armed, where Burns had just committed an act that threatened the survival of every living thing in the community, how is it that only one shot was fired? Springfield is not a town known for restraint. These are people who riot over minor disputes, who form mobs over misunderstandings, who have burned down civic infrastructure for reasons that would not qualify as reasons anywhere else. But when a billionaire steals the sun, a single shot is fired, and the matter ends. Either the shooting was more complicated than the official story suggests, or someone managed the aftermath very carefully. The official answer is Maggie Simpson. The writers stand behind it, the show committed to it. But the contest nobody won, the clues the victim himself called meaningless, the alternate endings that were fully produced, Homer's uncontested confession in a later season, and the final shot of Maggie mimicking gunfire alone in an empty room. All of it suggests that the greatest mystery in The Simpsons' history was never actually solved. It was closed. And in Springfield, those are two very different things. Section 4. The Immortality of Mr. Burns. Too expensive to die. Let your eyes close a little more here if they want to. This section is a long one, and it is a slow one. And then by the end of it, you will have a picture of Charles Montgomery Burns that is much stranger and much more unsettling than the cartoon villain the show presents at the surface. The question is simple. How is he still alive? Not as a rhetorical question, not as a joke about cartoon logic or animated convenience. Within the established canonical continuity of The Simpsons, Mr. Burns is a biological impossibility. His age has been referenced, implied, contradicted, and circled around in dozens of episodes over 36 seasons, but every version of his timeline places his birth somewhere in the late 19th century. He has personal memories from before 1900. He has described relationships with historical figures who died before most of the show's audience was born. He attended Yale. He served in the Second World War, in a capacity that the show describes with characteristic vagueness but clear moral complexity. He knew Howard Hughes, not as a famous name he had heard of, but as an acquaintance he had direct dealings with. By the most conservative reading of the available evidence, Burns is well over 100 years old. By the most expansive reading, he might be significantly older than that. And he does not merely exist, he functions. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He manipulates municipal politics with a precision that requires sustained intelligence and long-term strategic thinking. He orchestrates schemes that require an understanding of modern finance, modern technology, and modern legal infrastructure. His body is frail in the ways you would expect a body of advanced age to be frail. His physical strength is almost non-existent. Small animals can overpower him with minimal effort, but his mind is not frail at all. Burns is arguably the most cognitively capable character in Springfield. He thinks in long arcs. He plans across years. He understands systems and leverage and the mechanics of power in ways that nobody else in town approaches. He has been doing this for longer than any human being should be capable of sustained conscious function. The show addresses his survival directly in the Springfield Files, which is an episode we have already visited once in the context of the radiation theory. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment so extreme, so chemically and radiologically intensive, that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. The show is explicit about the treatment's purpose. It keeps Burns alive for exactly one more week. Without it, he dies. The margin for error in this arrangement is 0. Miss one appointment. Forget one dose. Let 1 week pass without the treatment. Burns is dead. His life is not sustained by biological processes. It is sustained by a recurring medical intervention administered on a strict schedule. He is kept alive the way a machine is kept running, through scheduled maintenance bars. Without the maintenance, the machine stops, and the treatment involves radiation. Of course it does. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's water supply for decades, whose workers and neighbors have been exposed to his plant's contamination for their entire lives, is personally dependent on controlled exposure to radiation to maintain his own biological function. Thus, Burns is not just profiting from radiation. He is powered by it. His body has been so fundamentally altered by a century of proximity to nuclear material that it can no longer sustain itself through normal cellular processes. It requires an external radiation input the way a normal human body requires food and water. Deprive it of that input for 7 days, and the system collapses. This illuminates the most famous medical scene in the series. Burns visits a doctor, and the doctor informs him that he has every disease known to medical science. Every single one present simultaneously in his body. The doctor's explanation is that these diseases exist in a state of perfect equilibrium, each one suppressing the others. They are all trying to kill him at once, and because they are all present at once, they create a kind of biological gridlock. The doorway is jammed. Nothing can get through. The doctor calls it Three Stooges syndrome, comparing it to 3 people attempting to pass through a door simultaneously. None of them move. Burns is the sickest man in the country, and functionally, he is indestructible. This is played as one of the show's most quotable jokes. It is a perfect piece of absurdist comedy writing, and it lands with precisely the tone it was aimed at. But if you apply the radiation theory and the immortality framework to it, the joke reveals something that is not funny at all. Burns's body is not maintaining this disease equilibrium through any natural process. The weekly radiation treatments are maintaining it. The treatments do not cure the diseases, they manage them. They provide the precise level of external intervention needed to keep every illness perfectly balanced against every other illness, preventing any single condition from gaining dominance and progressing to fatality. It is not medicine in any conventional sense. It is nuclear maintenance. Burns's body is itself a kind of reactor, and his treatments are the equivalent of adjusting the control rods, the mechanism that regulates a nuclear reaction to prevent an uncontrolled cascade. This is why Smithers matters so much more than he appears to. Smithers is not simply a devoted assistant. He is not just a man whose emotional life is built around his loyalty to his employer. Smithers is the logistical infrastructure that keeps Burns alive. He manages the schedule. He ensures that Burns makes every weekly appointment. He monitors Burns's physical condition with the kind of vigilance that goes well beyond professional obligation. The show has demonstrated repeatedly that if Smithers were ever removed from his position, if he were absent for any sustained period, Burns would be helpless. Not emotionally helpless, physically helpless. Without Smithers managing the treatment schedule, Burns misses a dose. The disease equilibrium collapses. Every illness in his body surges forward simultaneously, and a man who has survived for over a century of synthetic maintenance dies in the span of a week. Smithers is not devoted to Burns out of love alone. He is devoted because he understands that his departure is a death sentence. His loyalty is not just emotional, it is medical. And the knowledge of this, the knowledge that he is the only thing standing between Burns and a very specific kind of catastrophic failure, is the foundation of everything between them. Now consider the historical dimension. The Burns family predates the Industrial Revolution. The show has depicted their lineage as one of the oldest and most continuously powerful dynasties in American history. Not merely wealthy. The kind of wealthy that builds infrastructure and then charges everyone else to use it. The kind of wealthy that shapes nations rather than existing within them. Burns inherited this legacy and has been extending it for more than a century. He did not build an empire, he maintained one that was already ancient when he took control. Which raises a question the show never addresses directly. Is Burns unique? Or does his family have a history of finding ways to extend lifespans beyond normal human limits? If the current Burns has been alive for over 100 years through artificial means, did previous Burns patriarchs employ different strategies for different eras? Before nuclear medicine, before the technology that currently maintains him, did the Burns dynasty use other methods? The show does not say, but it establishes clearly that the family has been in continuous control of their fortune for longer than most American institutions have existed. That kind of continuity does not happen through normal generational succession. It requires either extraordinary fortune or extraordinary measures. And there is the matter of Burns's relationship with death itself. He has been shot by Maggie Simpson. He has been hospitalized dozens of times. Yet he has collapsed, fallen, been attacked, been poisoned, been abandoned in wilderness, been subjected to the full range of physical indignities that the show can imagine. And every single time he comes back, not through the cartoon resilience that Homer displays. Homer endures damage and heals because the show requires him to. Burns comes back through infrastructure, through money, through the machinery of wealth that ensures that no matter what happens to his physical form, there will always be a physician standing by with the resources and the knowledge to rebuild him. Homer's survival is passive. The show keeps him alive because it needs him. Burns's survival is engineered. He has spent a century constructing a system whose entire purpose is to ensure his continued existence regardless of what the world does to him. And every dollar spent on private medical research, every institution compromised, every politician purchased, every doctor retained odd. It all serves one function: keep the treatments coming, keep the diseases balanced, keep the reactor running. Because if Burns dies, his empire dies with him, and empires do not allow themselves to die. The most unsettling element of the Burns immortality theory is not the possibility that he might go on indefinitely. It is the recognition that Springfield cannot survive without him. The town's economy depends on the power plant. The power plant depends on Burns's continued operation of it. Burns depends on the medical infrastructure that his wealth provides. Everything feeds everything else in a closed loop, a self-sustaining system where the man and the machine and the money all maintain each other. And Springfield cannot kill Burns because Springfield cannot survive his absence. And Burns cannot die because dying would mean the system he built finally has to account for what it has done to the people living inside it. All the water, all the air, all the violations, all the three-eyed fish and the yellow skin and the children who have not aged, and the safety inspector who has been throwing donuts into the reactor for 4 decades. Burns is not the oldest man in Springfield because he got lucky. He is the oldest man in Springfield because he designed his survival the same way he designs everything else. Deliberately, systematically, with complete disregard for the cost to everyone else. He is, in the end, too expensive to die, and Springfield will keep paying the bill for as long as Burns keeps the lights on, which, and if his treatment schedule holds, will be forever. Section 5, The Principal and the Pauper, the town that made truth illegal. Here is a question that sounds like a philosophical puzzle, but is actually a description of something that happened in a specific episode of a cartoon that aired in September 1997. What does a community do when it is confronted with definitive proof that something it has accepted as true is actually a lie? If you answered acknowledge the truth and restructure its understanding accordingly, Springfield would like a word with you. The episode is called The Principal and the Pauper. Season 9, Episode 2. It aired on September 28, 1997. And the backlash was immediate, intense, and has never fully faded. 28 years later, fans still cite it as the moment The Simpsons changed. As the moment the writers stopped caring, the moment something broke. Harry Shearer, who voices both Principal Skinner and Mr. Burns, stated his displeasure with it publicly. Critics called it a betrayal of the show's accumulated continuity, but the critics were perhaps upset for the wrong reason. Here is what happens in the episode. Springfield Elementary is holding an event to honor Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service. During the celebration, a stranger walks in. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner. The real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war and was believed dead after years in a Southeast Asian camp. He survived, he escaped, he made his way home, and he found that someone else had been living his life. The man Springfield is known as Principal Skinner for 2 decades is not Seymour Skinner. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a petty criminal, a street kid with no direction and no prospects. He was drafted, served alongside the real Skinner, and when Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian felt responsible. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news to Skinner's mother, Agnes. When he arrived, Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never in his life been wanted by anyone, who had never had a family or a home or an identity worth keeping, went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the life, the mother. He lived inside that stolen identity for 20 years, until the real Skinner walked through the door and the fiction collapsed. Now, here's the part that the critics called a betrayal and that I want you to consider as something else entirely. Springfield holds a meeting. The real Skinner is present. Tamzarian is present. Everyone knows the truth. The entire community has been confronted with irrefutable evidence that their principal is a fraud, that the man who has been running their school and raising their neighbors' children and participating in their civic life is not who he claimed to be. The truth is not ambiguous. It is not disputed. It is confirmed. And the town votes. Not on whether to investigate further, not on whether to pursue legal consequences, on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The verdict is unanimous. They vote to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree establishing that the imposter is the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the decorated veteran whose identity was stolen while he was a prisoner of war, is physically removed from Springfield, tied to a rail car, expelled from the community, and the judge makes it explicitly illegal to ever mention the truth again, under penalty of torture. Under penalty of torture. Let that settle. A community, not a dictatorship, not a totalitarian state, a town in America that has a school board and a mayor and a police department and a functioning civic infrastructure, collectively decided that truth was less important than comfort. They had the proof. They had the person. They made their choice. They chose the lie. They criminalized the truth. They exiled the messenger. Fans hated this episode because they felt it destroyed Skinner's character. If everything about him was fiction, then what had the audience been investing in for all those seasons? The military service, the relationship with Agnes, the dynamic with Bart, all of it built on a stolen identity. The show had pulled the rug out from under years of character development for a joke. But here's what I want you to consider. The episode is completely honest about what Springfield is. It just says the quiet part out loud. Springfield has always operated this way. The town has always chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. Blinky the fish had 3 eyes, and Springfield shrugged and moved on. The power plant has 342 violations, and Springfield shrugged and moved on. Mr. Burns blocked out the sun, was shot, recovered, and Springfield shrugged and moved on. The reset button that erases consequences between episodes, the collective amnesia that allows the town to forget its own history, the persistent failure to connect obvious causes to obvious effects. This has been the defining feature of Springfield since the first episode. The principal and the pauper did not invent Springfield's capacity for deliberate denial. It just showed you the machinery behind it. It showed you the vote. It showed you the legal decree. It showed you the literal, physical expulsion of a true thing from the community. Every other time Springfield forgets something catastrophic, it happens between episodes, off-screen, in the invisible space between one week and the next. This was the one time the show let you watch it happen in real time. Though consider the list of things Springfield has experienced and subsequently forgotten. The town has been sealed under a giant dome by the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. It has been invaded. It has been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. It has survived nuclear near misses, alien encounters, the deliberate blocking of its sun, and the revelation that its principal is a fraud. And between any 2 episodes, the world resets. Nobody references the previous disaster. The slate is clean. The loop begins again. The coma theory calls this a dreaming brain resetting between cycles. The radiation theory calls it cognitive damage from chronic neurological exposure. The principal and the pauper offers a 4th explanation. Springfield resets because the town chooses to reset, collectively, deliberately, through an unspoken social contract that operates on the following logic. We will not acknowledge what happened. We will maintain the agreed-upon version of reality. We will treat the lie as truth and the truth as something to be exiled, and anyone who refuses to honor the contract will be removed from the community. This is not a cartoon trope. This is how real communities function when they cannot afford to confront what is true. Small towns, large institutions, families. Any group of people who share enough of a stake in a particular fiction that confronting the reality underneath it would threaten the structure they have built on top of it. The instinct is ancient. The mechanics are always the same. The truth gets buried. The narrative gets maintained. The messenger gets tied to a rail car. Springfield does not forget because its residents are stupid. Springfield forgets because remembering is too dangerous. Remembering the dome means acknowledging the pollution. Acknowledging the pollution means confronting the plant. Confronting the plant means challenging Burns. Challenging Burns means the economy collapses. The economy collapsing means the town ends. And so the town forgets. Not passively, not accidentally, but as a matter of collective survival. It votes to forget. It makes forgetting the law. And anyone who insists on remembering gets expelled. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's canary in the coal mine. He arrived with proof that the official story was fiction. He was not a criminal. He was not a threat in any physical sense. He was simply a true thing in a town that had decided it could not afford true things. And the town's response was not gratitude. It was not investigation. It was to make the truth illegal and send the man who carried it somewhere far away where it could not be seen anymore. In the context of the coma theory, this episode carries a darker weight. If everything since season 4 is Homer's dream, then Homer's unconscious mind invented a scenario in which an entire town votes to sustain a lie to keep a false version of someone's identity in place through collective agreement. And if Homer is dreaming this, then it is because Homer needs to believe something specific. He needs to believe that lies can be maintained forever. that a stolen life can become a real one if enough people agree to treat it that way, that the fake version of existence can replace the real thing and nobody will ever call it out. So because that is what Homer's coma is, a fake life running in place of the real one, a dream pretending to be reality. And as long as the dream town of Springfield keeps voting to maintain the fiction, Homer never has to wake up. The Principal and the Pauper is not the worst episode of The Simpsons. It is the most important one because it is the only episode that puts the infrastructure of Springfield's denial on the screen for you to examine. The machinery that makes every reset possible. The social contract that allows a contaminated town to pretend it is normal. A man in a coma to pretend he is awake. A community built on comfortable fictions to exile anyone who speaks a true thing. Armin Tamzarian is still pretending to be Seymour Skinner. Springfield is still pretending everything is fine. And somewhere out there, and the real Seymour Skinner is still on that rail car, heading away from the only life he had, carrying the truth that nobody wanted. The last honest man in a town that made honesty a crime. Section 6. Maggie Simpson. The silence of the most dangerous person in Springfield. Let us talk about Maggie. She does not talk, which makes her easy to overlook. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She communicates primarily through pacifier sounds and the kind of expressive stare that most adults could not manage on their best day. She is, by every visible surface measure, a baby. A small, quiet, entirely dependent infant who is carried from place to place and placed in various situations and generally treated as the least consequential member of a family that is not, as a rule, treated as particularly consequential by anyone. She is also, by any honest accounting of the evidence the show provides, the most capable and possibly the most dangerous person on Evergreen Terrace. Let us build the case carefully. She shot a man. We have already discussed the who shot Burns mystery at length, and we have established that the official answer raises significant questions. But for the purpose of understanding Maggie, let us accept the show's stated resolution for a moment. Maggie Simpson, at age 1, found a firearm, discharged it with sufficient accuracy to put a bullet in the chest of a grown man, and then, when the investigation concluded that she was responsible, he demonstrated in private, after confirming she was not being observed, exactly the kind of strategic awareness that suggests she understood what she had done and had decided that public demonstration of that understanding would be disadvantageous. She checked that she was alone, then she reenacted the shooting. That sequence, the scan of the room, the confirmation of solitude, the deliberate private reenactment, requires a specific kind of cognition. Situational awareness, memory of a completed action, an understanding that some actions have consequences when performed in front of others and different consequences when performed in private. The ability to distinguish between an observed state and an unobserved state and to calibrate behavior accordingly. These are not infant capabilities. But these are the capabilities of someone who understands how surveillance works. Now let us look at The Longest Daycare. This is a theatrical short film released in 2012, shown in cinemas before Ice Age, Continental Drift, and nominated for an Academy Award. It is 7 minutes of Maggie Simpson demonstrating cognitive and strategic capabilities that would be remarkable in an adult, in a context where her only tools are the motor skills of a 1-year-old and an intelligence that nobody around her suspects exists. The premise is simple. Maggie is dropped at a daycare facility run with authoritarian efficiency. Inside, she encounters a caterpillar about to become a butterfly. She wants to protect it. Another infant, a bully, wants to destroy it. What follows is a miniature thriller in which Maggie reads the environment, identifies threats, that develops multi-step plans, adapts in real time when those plans encounter obstacles, and ultimately succeeds in protecting the caterpillar and releasing it. She does this without speaking a single word, without walking reliably, while being physically constrained to the motor capabilities of a human being who has been alive for 12 months. Her body falls. It stumbles. It moves slowly and uncertainly through space. Her mind does none of these things. Her decision-making is flawless. Every choice she makes is optimal. She anticipates the bully's movements. She uses the facility's own mechanisms against its administrators. She executes sequences of actions that require temporal planning. If I do X now, then Y becomes available. And then Z is possible, in a body that should not be capable of the abstract cognition that temporal planning requires. She succeeds because her intelligence compensates for every physical limitation her development imposes. This is not a baby being lucky. This is a mind operating at a level that its container cannot fully support, winning anyway, because the mind is that much better than everything around it. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly. The results are inconsistent across episodes, which is itself interesting. The show does not want to commit to a specific number, perhaps because the number would raise questions that would be difficult to answer. But the pattern across all the episodes that touch on her cognition is consistent. Maggie's intelligence registers as extraordinary, as off the charts, as beyond what standardized measurement can capture. The show plays this for a quick laugh in each instance, and then moves on, treating it as a joke rather than a fact about the character that ought to change how we understand her. But patterns accumulate. Across 36 seasons of episodes, Maggie saves her family repeatedly. She navigates complex social situations that her age makes impossible. She demonstrates understanding of causal relationships, of social dynamics, of the emotional states of the people around her. She responds to crises not with panic, but with assessment. She identifies the most efficient path to a solution and pursues it. And she never, ever does any of this where someone who matters can fully observe it. This is the heart of the theory. Maggie's silence is not developmental, it is strategic. Look at what happens to the intelligent women in this family. Lisa Simpson is brilliant, genuinely gifted, with documented above-average intelligence and a moral framework that makes her, by most conventional measures, the most admirable person in the Simpson household. And what has that intelligence and moral framework earned her? Isolation, mockery, the persistent experience of being the only person in every room who understands what is actually happening, combined with the complete inability to get anyone to listen to her. Lisa speaks and gets ignored. Lisa challenges authority and gets punished. Lisa tries to improve things and gets crushed by the weight of a community that does not want to be improved. Her intelligence is real. Her impact is minimal. Because she wears her intelligence on the outside, but she announces it. She makes herself legible as the smartest person in the room, and the room responds by making sure she knows how little that matters in Springfield. Maggie has watched this happen. Maggie has been watching Lisa navigate this dynamic her entire life. From the beginning, and Maggie, who has the cognitive capability to draw conclusions from observed patterns, drew the obvious conclusion. Visibility is a liability. The lesson Lisa teaches, without meaning to, is that announcing your intelligence in Springfield does not earn you influence or respect. It earns you resistance. The more capable you appear, the harder the community works to limit you, to keep you in the appropriate slot, to ensure that your gifts do not translate into the kind of power that might challenge the established order. Maggie learned the opposite lesson. Invisibility is armor. Silence is power. The less they notice you, the freer you are to act. And consider what her invisibility has permitted her to accomplish. She shot a man and was not prosecuted because no jury would convict a baby. She led a daycare rebellion because nobody monitors infants closely enough to prevent them from organizing. Every remarkable thing she has ever done has happened below the threshold of adult awareness, in the margins of scenes that the camera is mostly pointed away from. Her heroic acts are background events. Her intelligence is a secret she keeps behind a pacifier and an expression of perfect blankness. She has spent 36 years constructing and maintaining the most effective disguise available to her. She pretends to be exactly what everyone expects a baby to be. Passive, helpless, dependent, pre-verbal. She is none of those things. She is the opposite of all of them. Now connect this to the radiation theory. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces mutations, and if those mutations manifest differently in different individuals based on factors we do not fully understand, then Maggie represents the opposite end of the spectrum from Homer. Homer's exposure, or the exposure that preceded him, that shaped the environment he developed in, reduced his cognitive function to the level of clinical impairment. Maggie's exposure amplified hers to levels that exceed measurement. Same cause, same family, same water, same air, same cracked cooling towers on the horizon. But where the radiation took something from Homer, it gave something extraordinary to Maggie. Homer and Maggie are two sides of the same radioactive coin. And if the coma theory is true, Maggie's genius carries an almost unbearable emotional weight. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode is the product of an unconscious mind holding on to its family, then Maggie's extraordinary capabilities are Homer's deepest hope for his youngest child, projected onto the dream. He cannot watch her grow up. He cannot see what she becomes. He cannot be there to protect her or guide her, or know whether she turns out all right. So, in the dream, he makes her capable of protecting herself. He gives her an intelligence that transcends her age. He makes her someone who does not need him there because his deepest fear is that she will need him and he will not be there. Maggie's genius, in this reading, is not a mutation. It is a prayer. A father who cannot wake up, dreaming that his youngest child will be okay without him. But in the waking interpretation of Springfield, if there still is a waking one, the picture is different and darker. Maggie does not speak because she has observed that speaking earns you nothing in this town. She does not reveal her intelligence because intelligence is a target in Springfield. She watches everything, she processes everything, she files it away. She waits. For what? The show never tells us. Maggie's endgame is the last genuinely unsolved mystery of the Simpson family. She is the only member of the household whose future has never been definitively depicted. Flash-forward episodes have shown us versions of adult Bart and adult Lisa. They have never committed to an adult Maggie, as if the show itself is not sure, or is not ready to say, what she is capable of becoming once she decides to act openly. We have seen glimpses. A baby who shot a billionaire. A child who organized a daycare uprising. A 1-year-old who saved a butterfly from a bully using multi-step strategic planning. A person who has spent 3 decades watching her family, her town, and the world with an intelligence that nobody suspects. She is 1 year old. She cannot walk reliably. She cannot speak beyond a few sounds. She is the most powerful person on Evergreen Terrace. She just has not decided what to do about it yet. And behind that pacifier, behind those enormous expressive eyes, behind 36 years of perfect, deliberate, strategic silence, something is thinking, something is planning, something has been watching the whole time. But when Maggie finally speaks, really speaks, fully and deliberately and without hiding, Springfield will not see it coming. Nobody will. Because that is exactly how Maggie designed it. Section 7. The Simpsons Predictions. Did the show write the future? This section is a gentler one, more of a puzzle than a mystery. Something to turn over slowly in your mind while your breathing slows. In the year 2000, the show aired an episode called Bart to the Future. In it, Lisa Simpson becomes the first female president of the United States. Her predecessor in the Oval Office is identified as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the 2016 presidential election. 16 years. The internet's response when this alignment became widely noticed was a mixture of astonishment and suspicion that has never entirely settled. And how did they know? How does a cartoon show from the year 2000 accurately identify a specific person as a future president 16 years before it happens? Are the writers time travelers? Is there a conspiracy? Is The Simpsons some kind of encoded prophecy hiding inside the format of a family sitcom? The list of apparent predictions is long enough to fill a video of its own. In 1995, the show depicted a device on Homer's wrist that looks remarkably like a modern smartwatch. In 1994, Homer goes to space with Buzz Aldrin, decades before commercial space travel became a conversation anyone was having seriously. In 1998, Homer writes a mathematical equation that, when examined by actual mathematicians later, appears to anticipate the mass of the Higgs boson particle, a discovery that would not be experimentally confirmed until 2012. In 1999, Homer proposes that the universe might be shaped like a donut, and years later cosmologists found radiation patterns suggesting the universe may indeed be toroidal. In 1993, an episode depicted a flu virus originating from Asia spreading to a small community, causing mass panic, supply shortages, and a desperate search for a treatment. 27 years before a global pandemic made that exact scenario the defining experience of a generation. In 1996, in an episode called Homerpalooza, a joke involves the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra while in an altered state. That exact collaboration happened in 2024 when Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. 28 years between the joke and the reality. In 1998, as the show depicted a media conglomerate purchasing a major entertainment studio. In 2019, Disney acquired 20th Century Fox. The show that had depicted the acquisition was at that point owned by Disney. The official explanation from inside the show is simple and somewhat deflating. Al Jean, who has been an executive producer since the earliest seasons, addresses it directly. If you throw enough darts, you will get some bullseyes. That is his explanation. The show has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of satirical observations about American culture, technology, politics, and social trends. When you generate that much content over that long a period, some of it is statistically guaranteed to align with subsequent events through sheer volume. Bill Oakley, who ran the show during some of its strongest seasons, puts it even more directly. Most of the predictions are not predictions at all. They are old observations about patterns that were already in motion, being noticed by viewers decades later when the patterns reached their obvious conclusions. The writers did not predict Trump's presidency. They observed that Trump had been publicly discussing running for office since the late 1980s and wrote a joke about the logical extreme of celebrity culture in American politics. They did not predict the Disney-Fox merger. They observed that media consolidation was an accelerating trend and imagined its endpoint. They did not invent the concept of the smartwatch. They observed that technology was becoming smaller and more personal and depicted the logical next step. Now, the Simpsons writing staff has historically been one of the most educated groups in American television. Multiple writers hold advanced degrees from institutions whose academic culture involves training people to read trends, analyze patterns, and extrapolate current trajectories to their natural conclusions. These are not random guesses. They are the observations of highly informed, analytically capable people who spend their professional lives studying American culture and then pushing what they observe to its furthest logical point. Factual verification organizations have systematically examined many of the most popular claimed predictions and found that the majority have simpler explanations than prophecy. Coincidence. Volume. Trend analysis that turned out to be accurate because the trends were real and the writers understood them. But here is where the explanation starts to show its limits. Some of the alignments are too specific for statistical probability to account for comfortably. The Trump prediction did not merely suggest that a celebrity might run for president. It named Trump specifically and depicted him descending an escalator in a sequence that visually echoes his actual 2015 campaign announcement. The Siegfried and Roy episode did not merely joke about exotic animal acts being risky. It depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers in a way that closely resembles what happened in 2003 when Roy Horn was critically injured during a performance. These are not vague trend extrapolations. These are specific details that land in ways that feel different from pure coincidence. And this is where the most interesting theory about the predictions emerges. Not the idea that the writers are psychic, not the idea that there is a conspiracy. Something more fascinating and more grounded. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes it. The show is one of the most widely watched, most frequently quoted, and most deeply embedded pieces of American media in existence. It has been running for longer than most of its current viewers have been alive. Its jokes have become part of the American cultural vocabulary. Its observations have become part of how Americans understand their own society. When the show makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke does not disappear when the episode ends. It enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people see it. It becomes a reference point. And it becomes something people mention when they think about Trump and politics and the direction of the country. It makes the idea feel familiar. It makes it feel like something the culture has already processed, already digested, already half expected. The joke does not predict the future. The joke makes the future feel inevitable. When reality catches up to the joke, when Trump announces his candidacy, when the escalator descends, when the cameras roll, the cultural response is not shock. It is recognition. We have seen this before, the show already told us. The prediction feels accurate because we were culturally prepared for the outcome in advance. The show's satire functions not as prophecy, but as normalization. It takes trends that are already present and depicts their conclusions as accomplished facts. And when those facts eventually arrive, the audience experiences the uncanny sense that they were foreseen, when what actually happened is that they were made familiar years in advance. Springfield does not reflect America. America has become Springfield. We stared into the mirror for 36 years, and the reflection started looking like us. There is one more dimension worth noting. The Simpsons has also made thousands of predictions that did not come true. Jetpacks, moon colonies, political outcomes that went differently, cultural shifts that never materialized. Nobody shares those. Nobody screenshots the misses. The confirmation bias engine of internet culture filters the archive relentlessly, surfacing only the moments where the show aligned with subsequent reality and discarding everything that did not. That the result is a highlight reel that looks, from a sufficient distance, like prophecy. But it is not prophecy. It is what you get when a brilliant show runs for an impossibly long time, staffed by highly educated and analytically gifted writers, producing more satirical observations about American culture than any other show in television history, and then having the full archive filtered by the most powerful confirmation bias engine ever created. The predictions are not supernatural. They are not conspiratorial. They are the natural outcome of volume, intelligence, and the way that internet culture selects and amplifies specific moments from a vast catalog. The show wrote so many possible futures that some of them were bound to materialize, and the ones that materialized are the only ones anyone remembers. Section 8. Mona Simpson, the mother who was erased. This section is a quiet one. More of a family story than a mystery, though it has both at its center. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official story. Abe Simpson told Homer that his mother had died when he was young. He showed Homer a grave. Homer mourned in the diff's unexamined way that children mourn things that happened before they were old enough to understand them. As a kind of ambient sadness, a shape-shaped absence rather than a specific grief. He grew up knowing he was a boy whose mother had died and whose father had been too emotionally closed off to fill what she left behind. That belief shaped everything about Homer. His desperate hunger for approval, his fear of abandonment that manifests as a kind of frantic clinging to anyone who offers him warmth, his willingness to absorb humiliation, to be ignored by his employer, to accept being treated as invisible because the alternative, being left, is the thing he fears most. Homer Simpson's entire personality is a coping structure built over a wound he does not fully understand. The wound of a mother who was gone before he knew her. Season 7 revealed that the wound was inflicted deliberately. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired in November 1995. And by virtually any accounting, it is one of the best episodes the show has ever produced. What happens is this. Homer, attempting to avoid work on a Saturday, fakes his own death. He pushes a dummy off a cliff near the power plant. The town believes he has died. When Marge insists he correct the records, Homer goes to the Hall of Records and discovers something that changes his life. According to the municipal documents, his mother is alive. She never died. The grave Abe showed Homer was not hers. It belonged to Walt Whitman, the poet. For Homer's entire life, his father had been passing off a famous writer's headstone as the burial marker of his wife. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave. She does not recognize him. He has grown up, become someone she could not have predicted, changed in every way that years of life without her produced. When he proves who he is, the reunion is one of the most genuinely affecting things the show ever put on screen. A grown man and his mother, separated for 27 years, finding each other at a grave that belongs to neither of them. And then she tells him why she left. The story goes back to 1969. Mona Simpson was an ordinary woman. She was married to Abe. She had a young son named Homer. She was living a quiet life while the world outside was churning through the civil rights movement, Vietnam, the counterculture, and then something inside her changed. The show depicts it with the kind of gentle absurdity that allows it to be both comedic and genuinely moving. Mona was radicalized. She joined a group of activists. They targeted a biological weapons laboratory, a facility owned by Mr. Burns. Let that sit for a moment. Burns did not just own a nuclear power plant with 342 safety violations. He owned a germ warfare laboratory in Springfield. Now, in the same town where Homer was growing up, where families were living their lives, where children were playing in parks and drinking the water and breathing the air. Burns was manufacturing weapons-grade biological agents in the community he was also slowly irradiating. Mona and her group broke into the lab. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, destroying the stored biological material. During the escape, in an act of instinctive human compassion that would cost her everything, Mona stopped to help someone who had been knocked down in the chaos. That someone was Mr. Burns. She helped the man whose weapons she had just destroyed, and Burns looked up and saw her face, and everything that followed was the consequence of that moment. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI. And from that instant, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact Abe. She could not hold her son or explain to him in words he could understand why she was leaving. She kissed Homer goodbye while he slept and disappeared into the night. For 27 years. Homer woke up and his mother was gone. Abe told him she was dead, and Homer spent the next 3 decades of his life carrying the belief that he was the kind of son a mother would rather disappear than raise. The conspiracy that grows from this discovery is one of the show's most carefully constructed long threads. Burns did not simply identify Mona to the authorities and consider the matter closed. He pursued her, actively, persistently, for decades. He held a personal grudge against a woman who had destroyed his weapons program, and he used his resources to ensure she could never return to her family. When Mona comes back to Springfield in the Season 7 episode, Burns spots her through a cab window. He calls the authorities. The FBI arrives at the Simpson house. Mona has to flee again, and Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time. This time he knows why she left. He knows who is responsible. And the man responsible is his employer. Homer works for Burns. Homer has worked for Burns his entire adult life. Homer earns his paycheck and his health insurance and his job security from the man who destroyed his family. The man who spent decades hunting his mother is the same man who signs his checks every 2 weeks. And Homer does not connect the dots. He does not confront Burns. He does not quit. He does not even seem to fully process the relationship between the billionaire who employs him and the billionaire who stole his childhood. Homer's inability to make this connection is not played as a joke. It is not a light comedic beat. It is tragedy. Homer is too damaged by the crayon, by the radiation, by decades of cognitive erosion to see the architecture of his own suffering. The conspiracy is complete. Burns did not just ruin Mona's life. He engineered Homer's. By driving Mona away when Homer was a child, Burns ensured that Homer would develop the specific psychological profile that makes him the perfect employee. Emotionally dependent, desperate for approval, incapable of sustained anger toward authority, terrified of abandonment, unable to organize resistance, unable to walk away. As Homer does not stay at the power plant because he is too limited to find better employment. Homer stays at the power plant because Burns broke him when he was 6 years old, before he was old enough to understand what was being done to him. And the broken version of Homer is precisely the version Burns needs in Sector 7G. The show confirms the architecture of this arrangement in a later season. Burns had committed a crime. Grandpa Simpson discovered it. In exchange for Grandpa's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer's employment, permanently, unconditionally, regardless of performance. Homer's job security across 742 documented errors is not the result of institutional incompetence. It is contractual. A deal made between his grandfather and his mother's persecutor, conducted in secret, never explained to Homer, because explaining it would require explaining everything else. Three generations of Simpsons, shaped by one man's grudge. Ashtwa, who made a deal with the enemy and buried the truth. Mona, who fought back and lost everything. Homer, who inherited the consequences and never understood why his life felt the way it did. And Burns, who won, because in Springfield the man with the money writes the rules. And the rules say Homer Simpson will work at the power plant until he dies. Mona Simpson died in a later season. Her death scene is one of the show's most quietly devastating moments. Homer sits beside her. He holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew leave for the last time. No joke, no cutaway, no reset. Just a man and his mother and the weight of 27 stolen years pressing down on both of them in a room that is very still. The Simpsons is a comedy. It has always been a comedy. But underneath the jokes, underneath 36 seasons of Homer falling down and getting back up, there is a story about a family that was taken apart piece by one man's power, and about the son who lived inside the wreckage without ever fully understanding what had happened to him. Mona fought back and lost. Abe made a deal and was silent. Homer inherited everything, and Burns won. Burns always wins, because in Springfield, that is how it works. Section 9. Where is Springfield? The town that exists everywhere and nowhere. If your eyes are getting heavy, that is good. Let them be heavy. You can listen with your eyes closed. Springfield will still be here. Let us talk about location. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people can identify it than can name the capital of a significant portion of the actual states in the country it supposedly occupies. It has a nuclear power plant, a tire fire, a gorge, a harbor, a monorail, an elementary school, a prison, 2 hospitals, and a convenience store that anchors the show's most iconic recurring visual. It has mountains and ocean and desert and farmland and forest. It borders Ohio and Nevada and Maine and Kentucky, depending on which episode you are watching. It sits on the coast and in the heartland simultaneously. It has blizzards and tropical heat waves within a single season. Springfield does not exist in any state. Springfield exists in all of them. The show has been deliberately and systematically contradicting its own geographic continuity since the beginning. Every time a clue appears that narrows the location, another clue arrives in a different episode that makes the narrowing impossible. The town is north in one episode and south in another. Lisa's area code is a Missouri prefix. The state abbreviation shown at various points is NT, which is not a real American state designation. When Homer calls the state capital, the voice on the other end identifies their state as one beginning with a vowel, which helps somewhat and then immediately stops helping because several states begin with vowels. The show gives you fragments and takes them back. Matt Groening, who created the show, has confirmed that he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, where he grew up nearby. He said this in a 2012 interview, and for approximately 48 hours, it seemed like the mystery had been solved. Springfield was in Oregon. The question was closed. And then the show continued to contradict this in subsequent episodes, and the writers did not alter their approach to honor the creator's confession. The mystery was maintained because the mystery, it turns out, is the point. Springfield's geographic impossibility is not a mistake. It is not the accumulated result of careless writing across 3 decades. It is a deliberate design choice maintained with something approaching discipline for a specific reason. Springfield is everywhere because Springfield is meant to be anywhere. Groening has confirmed this directly. The writers have confirmed it. The show is designed to be recognizable to any American viewer regardless of their zip code, which means it cannot be pinned to a specific region, climate, culture, or economic context. And it must be simultaneously the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt, New England and the Midwest, the coast and the interior. It must be the town you grew up in, no matter where you grew up. The geographic impossibility is the mechanism that achieves the universality. This is the surface explanation. It is accurate. It is well documented. It is confirmed by the people who make the show. But under the lens of the theories we have spent this evening examining, the geography becomes something more interesting. If the radiation theory is true, If Springfield is a contaminated zone where the laws of biology have been warped by decades of nuclear exposure, why should geography be exempt? If the people of Springfield can have 4 fingers and yellow skin and survive injuries that would destroy any normal person, why should the land they live on obey the normal rules of American geography? Perhaps Springfield has mountains and oceans and deserts within driving distance because the contamination does not only affect biology. Perhaps it affects the physical landscape. Perhaps decades of radiation have done something to the spatial logic of the region that conventional cartography cannot account for. If the coma theory is true, Springfield's impossible geography makes even more intuitive sense. Homer's dreaming brain does not have a precise map of America stored in it. It has impressions, fragments, emotional memories rather than geographic facts, mountains from a vacation he barely remembers, an ocean from a commercial on the hospital TV, a desert from a film someone was watching in the corridor outside his room, farmland from driving through the Midwest on a trip that happened before the coma, and lives now only as a feeling rather than a route. Homer's unconscious mind assembled Springfield from every American landscape he ever encountered or heard about, layered them over each other without concern for coherence, because dreams do not have geographic logic. Dreams have emotional logic. Springfield feels like America because it is built from Homer's fractured, incomplete, feeling-driven memory of America, which is not a map. It is a longing. If the principle and the Popper theory is true, if Springfield operates through collective denial and the systematic suppression of inconvenient truths, then the town's refusal to have a fixed geographic location is the ultimate odd expression of that denial. You cannot investigate a town you cannot find. You cannot bring federal charges against a nuclear facility if the state it is located in keeps changing. You cannot hold anyone accountable for anything if the regulatory jurisdiction is perpetually undefined. Springfield's geographic uncertainty is not just a comedy device. It is a legal shield. A town with no fixed location has no fixed oversight, no consistent EPA coverage, no permanent state attorney general to investigate the plant, no jurisdiction that can claim responsibility for what has been allowed to happen there. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means someone shows up with a map and official identification and starts asking about the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the billionaire who personally remembers the Spanish-American War. In the mockumentary episode Behind the Laughter, Springfield's location is finally revealed. The family is said to be from northern Kentucky, and then the episode was rerun in syndication with the location changed to a different state. The answer literally depends on which broadcast you are watching. Even when Springfield has a definitive answer, that answer is not definitive. It shifts. It mutates. It refuses to be pinned. Every state in the country has been proposed at various points as Springfield's home. Every theory has evidence and contradicting evidence. The show has maintained this ambiguity for longer than most of its viewers have been alive. Springfield will never be located, not because the writers cannot decide, because they decided long ago that Springfield is more useful as an unsolved location than as a placed one. And a town that belongs to everyone belongs to no one, and a town that belongs to no one cannot be shut down. Section 10. The floating timeline. Why nobody in Springfield is allowed to age. If you are still with me, you are doing beautifully. Let your breathing slow down a little more if you can. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when The Simpsons debuted in December 1989. He is 10 years old right now. Lisa was 8 then. She is 8 now. Maggie was 1. She is 1. Homer and Marge were roughly in their mid-30s. They still are. 36 years have passed in the world outside the television screen. 0 years have passed in Springfield. The characters exist in a state of permanent temporal suspension, locked at the ages they were when the show began, cycling through decades of cultural change without adding a single year to their ages. The industry term for this is a floating timeline. The show's present is always the viewer's present. When the episode airs in 2025, the characters are in 2025. When it aired in 1995, they were in 1995. The technology changes, the references change, the cultural backdrop updates, but the characters do not. They are frozen. Most animated shows that run for extended periods use some version of this convention. It is common enough that most viewers accept it without comment. But The Simpsons has been running for long enough that the floating timeline has created contradiction that's so large and so strange that they have cracked the foundation of the show's internal logic. Consider Homer and Marge's backstory. When the show began, their history was grounded in the late 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school. They fell in love during a specific cultural era with specific music and fashion and reference points that made sense for parents in their mid-30s during the late 1980s. Their courtship was era-specific. Their memories were era-specific. The flashback episodes that depicted their youth were consistent with the idea that these were people who grew up in a particular decade. But as the floating timeline dragged the present forward, their backstory had to move with it. If Homer and Marge are in their mid-30s in 2025, they did not meet in 1980. They met around 2005, which means their high school years were not defined by Watergate and disco. They were defined by MySpace and early YouTube. The show has addressed this directly. Now, in later flashback episodes, Homer and Marge's formative years have been rewritten to include 1990s references, then 2000s references, then 2010s references. Their origin story has been told and retold at least 4 times. They were counterculture, then grunge, then hipster, then something vaguely millennial. The characters are the same, the love story is the same, but the era in which it occurs keeps sliding forward like a footnote that cannot commit to a page. This means Homer and Marge do not have a stable past. Their history is a draft that gets revised on demand to make the current episode work. Their memories are, in a meaningful sense, unstable. They remember different decades depending on when you ask them. Now apply the theories. Every theory we have examined tonight converges on this point. Every one of them, through a different path, arrives at the same conclusion about why nobody in Springfield ages. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of an unconscious man whose reference material was frozen on the day he lost consciousness. His brain cannot add years to his family because it was not present to observe those years. The radiation theory says nobody ages because chronic exposure to nuclear contamination has fundamentally altered the cellular biology of Springfield's residents in ways that conventional aging does not apply to. The principal and the pauper theory says nobody ages because Springfield collectively decides not to acknowledge the passage of time, the same way it collectively decided not to acknowledge that its principal was an imposter. Springfield chooses not to age. It makes the choice and enforces it socially. The Burns immortality theory says the concept of aging is already negotiable in this universe, since at least one resident has been circumventing it for over a century through artificial means. If Burns can opt out of aging, perhaps the mechanisms that maintain him have effects on the surrounding population as well. All of these theories are saying the same thing in different vocabularies. Time does not work in Springfield. Something has broken the normal temporal flow for everyone who lives there. Whether it is the radiation or the coma or the collective denial or the consequences of Burns's medical infrastructure spreading into the environment, time is not moving for these people the way it moves for everyone else. The floating timeline is a symptom. It is the show telling you, through the most fundamental element of its structure, that these characters are trapped, locked in a loop, endlessly cycling through variations of the same lives, the same problems, the same dynamics, without progression, without the conclusions that time should eventually deliver to every living thing. The show has imagined its characters aging. It does this occasionally in flash-forward episodes that are presented as hypotheticals. In the Season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding, the show moves forward to show Lisa as a young adult, engaged, living a life that is recognizably the life of an intelligent, principled, somewhat lonely woman who grew up in Springfield. The episode is detailed and emotionally rich. It is good television, and it demonstrates that the writers understand exactly what these characters would become if time were allowed to pass. And then the episode ends and Lisa returns to being 8 years old. The future closes. The permanent present resumes. The glimpse is sealed off. The show can imagine its characters grown. It refuses to allow them to grow. The capacity is there, the will is not. And this refusal is not arbitrary. It is not laziness. It is the show's most important creative decision, and it carries implications that extend beyond the television screen. The Simpsons has been the American family for longer than any other fictional household in the history of the medium. They have been the American family since before a significant portion of their current audience was born. And the American family, as the show depicts it, cannot be permitted to change. Homer must remain the dad who falls down and gets up. Marge must remain the patient center. Bart must remain the one who pushes against the limits. Lisa must remain the idealist. Maggie must remain in potential. The structure must hold. The dynamic must be preserved. Because the moment the Simpson family ages, like the moment Bart goes to college, the moment Lisa moves to a city that appreciates her, the moment Maggie speaks and walks and becomes the person she has been quietly preparing to become. The show is no longer a comedy. It is an elegy. It is a story about a family that ran out of time and became something different, something unrecognizable, something that the audience does not know how to hold. And America does not want that story. America wants the version where the kids are small and the parents are together and the house is the same and the beer is cold and the opening couch gag plays and nobody has to say goodbye. The floating timeline is the show's thesis statement. These characters are frozen because we need them to be. They represent something the audience cannot let go of. The messy, chaotic, infuriating, deeply loving, indestructible American family. The family that survives everything, that recovers from everything, that resets after every disaster and starts again on Sunday night at 8 o'clock. They do not age because aging means ending. And the American family is not allowed to end. The loop is not their prison. It is ours. We built it. We maintain it. Every time we watch, every time we laugh, every time we quote a line from an episode that aired before we were born, or sat on a couch as a child and felt something familiar in that yellow house on Evergreen Terrace, we tighten the loop a little more. We make it a little harder for the Simpsons to escape. Because if they escape, if the timeline stops floating and starts landing, if Bart turns 11 and Lisa turns 9, and Maggie says her second word and Homer retires and Marge is left in an empty house, then the show ends. And the show ending means admitting something we have been avoiding for 36 years. The version of America that The Simpsons represents, chaotic, resilient, eternally optimistic, middle class, suburban, held together by love and stubbornness and the refusal to give up on each other, was always temporary, was always fragile. It was always one birthday away from becoming something we do not recognize. We pressed pause in 1989. We never pressed play, and now here we are, 36 years later, watching the same family in the same house, waiting for something to change, knowing nothing will, because we will not let it. Section 11. Hans Moleman and Ned Flanders. The Body Count and the Broken Saint. We are getting close now. Just 2 more threads to follow and then the full picture will be assembled. First, Hans Moleman. If you have watched The Simpsons for any length of time, you know him. He is the tiny, nearly blind, elderly man who appears in the background of Springfield scenes and exists primarily to suffer. He is hit by cars. He is crushed by falling objects. He is buried alive, eaten by animals, struck by lightning, incinerated, set upon by bees, drowned, compressed, and in at least one memorable instance simply walks into traffic and disappears beneath the wheels without ceremony. By careful conservative estimate, he is the most frequently killed character in the history of American animation. The important detail is that these deaths are not in Treehouse of Horror episodes. They are not in dream sequences or clear fantasy contexts. They happen in regular canonical episodes. Hans Moleman dies in real Springfield, in real time, and then appears in the following episode completely restored, with no explanation, no resurrection scene, no acknowledgement from any character that this man was dead a week ago and is now standing in the background of a grocery store. Most viewers accept this as a long-running visual gag. Moleman dies a lot. It is funny. Move on. But consider it through the lens of what we have been discussing. If the radiation theory is true, Moleman may represent the most extreme mutation in Springfield, a man whose biology has been so fundamentally altered by nuclear exposure that his body possesses the ability to reconstitute itself after fatal trauma. He does not survive the way Homer survives. Homer endures damage and heals. Molman actually dies. His body ceases all function, and then he comes back. As if death in Springfield is, for certain residents, a temporary condition rather than a permanent one. A biological reset triggered by whatever the plant has done to cellular structure at the most basic level. If the coma theory is true, Molman serves a different and arguably more unsettling function. He is a background process in Homer's dream, but a minor character that Homer's unconscious mind does not care about enough to maintain with consistency. He dies because the dreaming brain occasionally lets secondary figures lapse. It cannot hold every character in active memory simultaneously, and Molman is low on the priority list. He comes back because the dream needs him to populate the next scene, to make Springfield feel inhabited, and so the brain retrieves him from storage and sets him down somewhere new, without any memory of what happened to him in between. Molman in this reading is not a person. He is furniture. Furniture that the dream occasionally breaks and then reassembles because the dream requires a certain density of background figures to feel real. If the collective denial theory is true, Molman's deaths are simply another thing Springfield has agreed not to notice. A man dies in public, repeatedly, visibly, in front of witnesses, and the town does not investigate, does not grieve, does not ask how he keeps returning. It has normalized his death cycle the way it normalizes everything else that should be alarming. Three-eyed fish, a billionaire who emits light, a baby who shot a man, a principal who is not who he says he is, and a tiny elderly man who dies every few weeks and shows up for more. There is one more detail about Molman that matters. He once stated his age as 31. Look at him. He appears to be in his late 80s at minimum. His movements are those of a man whose body has been worn far beyond normal wear. His vision is nearly gone. Yet he moves through the world with the careful deliberateness of someone who has learned to expect impact. If he is telling the truth about his age, and there is no reason within the show to assume he is lying, then something aged him catastrophically. Something took a man in the prime of his physical life and compressed decades of deterioration into years. Something that also paradoxically made him nearly impossible to kill, despite his apparent fragility. Something that made death revolving. The radiation theory answers this. The coma theory answers this. The collective denial theory answers this. The only framework that does not have an answer for Hans Molman is the one that says, The Simpsons is just a cartoon and none of it means anything. Which is, of course, one possible answer, but it is the least interesting one. And this late in the evening, we have come too far for the least interesting answer. Now, Ned Flanders. Ned is the character the show has quietly destroyed more thoroughly than any other, in the most patient and the most methodical way, over more episodes and more seasons than almost any character study in television history. On the surface, Ned is everything Homer is not. Kind, generous, devout, physically fit, financially responsible. A good father, a good neighbor, a person who demonstrates every conventional virtue that Homer consistently fails to demonstrate. By any objective measure, Ned is the better man. He tries harder, he cares more, he gives more, and the show punishes him for it. His wife Maud was killed at a Springfield Speedway event when a t-shirt cannon misfired. The shirts were aimed at Homer, who was dodging them. Redirected by Homer's evasion, the shirts struck Maud and knocked her from the bleachers. Homer's selfishness, his simple reflexive self-preservation, killed the woman Ned loved. And Ned forgave him, because that is what Ned does. He absorbs. He forgives. He turns the other cheek and accepts and moves on with the patience of someone who has decided that grace is the answer to every injury. When a hurricane destroys Ned's house and the community rebuilds it poorly and it collapses, Ned breaks. He has a complete psychological crisis. He screams at the town. He says things he has held inside for years. And then he is institutionalized, committed to a mental health facility, where, in the process of treatment, something is revealed about Ned Flanders that reframes every prior season. Ned was not always like this. As a child, Ned was violent and uncontrollable. His parents, being people who had absorbed counterculture philosophies about discipline, did not know how to handle him. They took him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him through intensive behavioral modification. The kind of work that did not simply redirect behavior but restructured the architecture of how Ned processed emotion. Ned's kindness is not a character trait. It is a cage. His patience with Homer is not saintly. It is pathological. He cannot express anger because his brain was wired to suppress anger at all costs. His faith is not spiritual conviction in the pure sense. It is a load-bearing structure, an external framework that provides the organization and meaning that a man with his psychological history needs to keep functioning. Yet his forgiveness of Homer after Maude's death is not grace. It is the programmed response of a person whose capacity for rage was removed before he was old enough to choose whether he wanted to keep it. The show knows this. It has shown us what happens when the conditioning fails and the underlying person emerges. The despair is bottomless. The person underneath the programming is not violent exactly, though the hints are there. He is devastated. Ned Flanders is a man who has spent his entire adult life performing goodness because the alternative, the person he actually is, the child whose aggression was conditioned into something else, is someone that neither he nor Springfield can afford to face. And then there is the theological dimension, which is the part that stays with you. God talks to Homer. This is canon. Twice at minimum. How in the show's run? God has appeared to Homer and had direct conversations with him. Homer, who sleeps during church, who treats religion as an inconvenience, who has no consistent practice or devotion, who approaches the divine with the same casual, self-interested attitude he brings to everything else in his life. God talks to Homer. God does not talk to Ned. Ned, who goes to church every Sunday without fail. Ned, who reads scripture and follows its precepts and structures his life around his faith in a way that is genuine rather than performed. Ned, who has suffered loss after loss and responded to each one with renewed commitment to his beliefs rather than apostasy. Ned, who is listening, who has always been listening. He gets silence. The drunk who falls asleep in the pew gets divine conversation. The devout man who has organized his entire life around his faith gets nothing. The drunk survives everything and gets rewards. The devout man does everything right and gets punished. This is not random cruelty on the show's part. This is a thesis. The Simpsons is telling you something about Springfield that applies beyond Springfield. Goodness is not rewarded here. Kindness is not protected. Effort in the direction of virtue does not result in virtue's returns. The system, whether it is Burns's empire or the radiation or the collective denial or simply the machinery of how things work in this particular town, does not care about moral behavior. It cares about compliance. And Ned is the most compliant man in Springfield. He was built to be compliant before he was old enough to choose. His reward is a dead wife, on a rebuilt house that collapsed before it was finished, a neighbor who will never truly appreciate him, and a God who speaks to everyone in Springfield except the one person who has dedicated his life to being worthy of the conversation. Homer Simpson is what happens when you do everything wrong in a system that does not punish wrongness. Ned Flanders is what happens when you do everything right in a system that does not reward rightness. They have lived next to each other for 36 years, and the distance between them has never closed. Because the system is not designed to close it. The system is designed to keep Homer at the plant, and Ned at the church, and Burns at the top, and Molman in the ground, and everyone exactly where they are, forever, in a loop that began in 1989 and has not ended yet. That is Springfield. That is the entire show, reduced to its simplest possible form. A town where nothing changes, where no one grows, where time does not pass and consequences do not stick, and the same family sits on the same couch in the same house every week, watching the same television, cycling through the same lives, locked in the same loop, because no one inside it can see the walls, and no one outside it will let them out. Section 12. The conclusion, the loop we built for ourselves. And now here we are, 2 hours in Springfield, or close to it. The longest you have probably spent thinking about a cartoon show in years, possibly ever. We have examined the radiation that changed the biology of every person living in the shadow of those cooling towers. We have sat with the possibility that Homer has been dreaming since April 1993, generating the show out of unconscious need rather than conscious experience. We have reopened the Burns shooting case and found that it was closed rather than solved. We have traced Burns's impossible lifespan and found the infrastructure that keeps it going. We have watched a town vote to criminalize truth and exile the man who carried it. We have looked behind Maggie's silence and found something extraordinary in the space behind it. We have counted the predictions, understood the mechanism, and accepted that the show's accuracy about the future has more to do with intelligence and volume and the way culture shapes itself than with anything supernatural. We have followed Mona Simpson from a quiet life to a fugitive's existence and traced the damage it left across 3 generations of a family that deserved better. But we have searched the map for Springfield and found it everywhere and nowhere. We have stared at the floating timeline until we understood that it is not a narrative device but a reflection of something we chose. Every theory in this video is different. Different evidence, different logic, different assumptions about what the show is and what it wants to say. But every theory arrives at the same conclusion. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something fundamental. Something that lives in the structure of the show rather than its surface. Whether it is radiation or dreams or denial or institutional corruption or the simple weight of existing for 36 years without being allowed to change. Something has bent the rules of normal reality in this town. And the show has been pointing at it quietly, patiently, every single week, us through 788 episodes for anyone willing to look. The Simpsons is not hiding its mysteries. It is showing them to you. Every yellow face and four-fingered hand and ageless child and billionaire who will not die in town that will not change. All of it visible. All of it there. The show has been telling you for decades. It just trusts you to notice on your own, and mostly we do not, because we have been watching for so long that we have become Springfield. We have accepted everything. We have shrugged at the three-eyed fish the same way the town did. We have moved on from each catastrophe the same way the characters do. We have normalized it all. But the theories exist because some people refuse to do that. They looked at Springfield and said, wait. They dug, they connected. Then they asked the questions that the characters cannot ask because the characters are trapped inside the loop. And what they found is a version of this show that is stranger and sadder and more beautiful than the one on the surface. A version where Homer's impairment is a wound inflicted by a system that broke his family before he was old enough to understand why. Where Maggie's silence is the most intelligent decision anyone in the family has made. Where Burns's longevity is the logical conclusion of unchecked wealth applied to the problem of mortality. Where Marge's patience is the structural beam that holds the whole fragile thing upright. Where Bart's rebellion is the only sane response to a world that stopped making sense a long time ago. And where Lisa, 8 years old and brilliant and alone and still asking questions that nobody wants to answer, is the only person in Springfield who has not stopped looking. That is The Simpsons. 36 seasons, 788 episodes, the longest-running animated series in American history, the most analyzed, most theorized, most discussed show ever made. And after all of it, after all the evidence and all the theories and all the hours spent trying to find the thread that ties it together, the biggest mystery is still the simplest one. Why can we not let them go? Maybe because they are us. Maybe because Springfield is our town and Homer is our father and Marge is our mother, and Bart is the version of ourselves we wanted to be, and Lisa is the version we should have been, and Maggie is the version we keep hidden, watching everything, saying nothing, waiting for the right moment to finally speak. Or maybe it is simpler than that. Maybe we cannot let them go because letting them go means admitting something. That 36 years have passed, that we are older now. That the world changed. That the couch we sat on as children watching that opening theme has been replaced or discarded or is somewhere we cannot return to anymore. And as long as The Simpsons is on, as long as the loop keeps floating, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and Homer is stumbling through the front door at 5:30 after another day at the plant, as long as that is still happening on a Sunday night somewhere, in reruns and new episodes and clips on phones in bed, we do not have to admit any of that. We can sit down, We can turn something on, and we can go home to Evergreen Terrace. Not to the family that never changes, in the town that never ages, in the show that never ends. Springfield will be here when you wake up. It always is. That is the whole point.